Hanum Beshia, me better, na me babato ade, oil, hanum say. Timibato oil and soon be come, me share filling station, where filling station, say. Tinanka me train say, in soon tia, Nanka me call. That and I make car no see other side one. Intimi train since soon better no. And ye share money, I think say, Eja, Ebu, Eja to Admu, Timi Gran and Jano, a so me team, any menim. And as she, Tinanku Padum, Mitimi P, no. Few on the man who review. Me no sit in that 37 hospital. To me, that hospital for almost 9 months. And I'm at 37 hospital.
My name is Uchenna Abose. During the June 3rd, I was selling markets at good overhead. We thought that maybe it's a small rain before we can know that the rain was too much. To know that I was living at Accra. So, whenever I want to go to Accra, I must pass through the filling station who get born. So I was opposite of the filling station before the incident happened. I'm about to run before the fire catch me for the face. So I had to feather into water, then I had to swim in the water and wake up. I took myself to Kulibu Hospital that night. That night was horrible. When I sat down, I made who cry, no move, and you almost because then say, Namity said, Metiano, Namasasa. And I mean, no more transfer, mammy, no more Cassia, Sicilian Yankupado, no mere day. Editing. But the sense to the Nuechino, in Fanny's Minya speak a crank cry, Trimum, but and this first, and said, I'm a Tias, and I said, I'm 1 day, and I met said the first Namitiano, you must have made my man. Driving work, and I'm Monsieur Antino. I quite say, no, me did them and Valentino, we knew my Musuma heading. Into the say, no, and Coupaduna. One Ghana movement for ever saw June 3rd film, no Musomo de Assemno, Echo Court of my already Miancasano, Radio Machiaco, Court one, one Ghana movement for Medu Machiaco, Court Casid Monomedia. But the extra say, Assemno City, send your Chenny, ye move to see and ye did them, one didn't swat and Namusadi see it, ye that brim, ye Juma Semu, I had dear my pan, and yesterday. Any Ghana buying one Ghana movement for said, I come Akumana, or more boy, a dear some nature man. The best of my home, Yakupa Modiamo say, or Muntimin Kayon, no Mundi, Nimna, Assem no Mudi Chaman. Yenya Assembly training now, court no so ye bomb pine and Kuma, Nampin phones we did in the judges and Ladeno, or Moon Huye, no Muntimedia Assembly man, Yenya Assembly training. But Yankasam look as I say, now Mitino said a Mayday. Mashisha made them into me picture and Casa Crano. Me bet you later when all said me picture the city, but did them and Casa into your best dresser we be judgment no more.
The One Ghana movement has put together a legal team and is funding all the legal processes of this project. We are currently representing over 70 victims in court. This is the 5th year of this disaster. We know that the victims have been through a lot. Actually dealing with them personally, attending their meetings, speaking to them over the years, we know that they have gone through very difficult times. Unfortunately, the wheels of justice grind quite slowly, and so we have been in court for about 3 years now, but we do have hope that we are going to have a good legal process.
Now it's 5 years we are going. They should at least do something for us. My own self, I think maybe I'm getting back. I guess some people we see right now, we won't even near them. They are even worse than my own. But government promised they help us, but we don't see the help. Up to now, we don't see the help. We thank God we are moving with the One Ghana movement. So the last time we visited them, that was 3 years ago. Now 4 years and 5 years, we are still going there. So we beg the government to answer us this year, so that at least we can use it and forget our parents the way they said it before.
I can understand the frustration with some of the victims. We can say that we are now getting to the point of real action. And I want all the victims who are hoping that some reasonably permanent, form of compensation will come their way. I want them to be patient and to just hang in there and know that no matter how it delays, it will come to an end. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and I'm your host, Samson Ladi Anyanini. And just gone by was Samson's Take, and I titled it, Let's Remember June 3. And on June 3, the graphic report was captioned, Apocalypse in Accra, 150 dead so far in flood inferno. And up to this point, there are many of them that are still struggling with life, some that are still not knowing what will happen to them, whether they will survive it or not. There are some that have suffered permanent disfigurement of their entire bodies, as you saw, apart from those you saw being thrown into the buckets of the vehicle because they were dead, charred bodies. There are those who suffered permanent disfigurements of their faces, fractured legs and arms, permanent disfigurements of their torsos, arms, stomachs, legs, chest, backside, and doctors' reports say some of them will never get back to the original place. But guess what? It took some other country to give Ghana some small amount of money, which we have given to some of them in 5,000, 8,000, and 10,000, and that has been the end of it. Our government and our state is waiting for them to get a judgment in a court to compel it to take care of these people. My guest on Newsfile this morning, Dr. Kwabena Bempatando, Deputy Director General for Quality and Access of the Ghana Education Service. Thank you very much for making time to join us, sir.
It's a pleasure this morning to see you.
Also, Bright Simmons, Honorary Executive, Imani Africa. Thanks for joining us, Bright.
Thank you for having me.
On Zoom is Kofi Abochi, Dean, UPSA Law School. Mr. Kofi Abochi, thank you for joining us. All right. So as you know, we have two issues that we are looking at. We are looking at the eased restrictions and why there seem to be, quote-unquote, rejection of what appeared to have been expected. A greater majority of the churches are not going to church tomorrow, even though the president said, go to church. And some of them had actually asked for it. So what's going on? And the schools too, are they actually getting back in full? And how are people protected? So we'll focus more particularly on the two aspects as to the schools and the churches. And then we'll go to deal with the unending, disputes, if you like, about the new voters register. So we first can hear the president on Sunday telling us what the new regime in these COVID times are.
Fellow Ghanaians, with effect from Friday, 5th June, we will begin stage 1 of the process of easing restrictions. An abridged format for religious services can commence. 25% attendance, with a maximum number of 100 congregants, can worship at a time in church or at the mosque, with a mandatory 1 meter rule of social distancing between congregants. In addition to the mandatory wearing of masks for all persons at all times in churches and mosques, a register of names and contact details of all worshippers and hand-washing facilities and sanitizers must be provided, with a maximum duration of 1 hour for each service. Religious institutions that are desirous of opening their premises to their members, such as churches, mosques, and others, must disinfect, fumigate, and put in place the requisite logistics needed to guarantee safe opening and operationing. They must work with the designated regulatory bodies and undertake test runs of the protocols I have outlined. I would appeal to them, in the case of Christians, on the first Sunday of reopening, i.e. 7th June. In the case of the Adventists, Saturday, 6th June. And in the case of Muslims, on the first Friday, i.e. Salat al-Jum'ah, on 5th June, to dedicate their worship to prayers for the nation in these challenging times. The Minister for Religious Affairs will tomorrow, Monday, 1st June, outline in detail the specific guidelines for the safe reopening of our churches and mosques.
Right. So we already know the posture of the churches or the religious organizations to the opportunity that the president gave them upon the advice that he has had from the medical or physicians who are also helping in the COVID-19 situation. For most of the churches, we know now, they are simply not responding, and they have chosen to rather wait, including ICGC, which originally cautioned those pastors who were asking for the situation to be opened up. For the Catholic Church, very massive religious organization in the country, they appear to say that the various bishops and pastors within the various places must assess their own circumstance and determine whether they are ready to proceed with church or masses, except that they will not be able to comply with all the measures that are suggested, including how to deal with communion. Let me begin with Bright. Was it your expectation, although there are some people who predicted that this will happen and got invited by the police for predicting the president so accurately?
In terms of reopening or
Yes.
the phase reopening?
Yes.
It's becoming clear that the anchors of policy, the triggers for specific decisions are not very clear. So we don't know, for instance, whether we're looking at a particular infectivity ratio or we are looking at a particular rate of rise or a particular transmission dynamic. So it has become obvious that the interminable postponements were no longer tenable, because it's not clear at what stage you start to loosen up restrictions. And you couldn't really communicate to people what the yardsticks for those decisions would be. So it's become quite apparent for a while now that we're relying largely on gut instinct. They're looking at some data, they are listening to people, and based on the general mood in the committees, the technical committees and the likes that are advising the government, they've decided to start taking some actions largely on faith.
Right.
Because it's quite clear, if you take the infections that we've recorded this week, it's about 5 times the infections that were recorded in the whole first month after the first infections were detected. So there is no evidence whatsoever that the restrictions that have been used so far are having the effect that they should have. And I had a sense that it gets to a point where if it is not too clear what is driving the decision making, then discretion, judgment, political instinct, those kind of things become much more predominant. So I wasn't too surprised, because it wasn't clear to me anymore what the triggers for government decision making were.
All right. We'll be concentrating on you a lot, because you are going to superintend, or as you are superintending the opening of the schools in the phased manner that the president has announced. The reaction first of the religious organizations.
Thank you. I came here to talk about schools.
Right.
But I would like to say that, unfortunately, for someone who is a big believer in data and the interpretation of data in decision making, your assertion is a bit worrying, because from the very beginning, His Excellency the President has made every decision based on data. And he has informed the Republic and everybody in this country that his decisions are made on science, the science of the disease, as well as the data that is available. And it is based on that, at least on the education side, we have made every decision. I have been fortunate enough to at least sit in 3 or 4 meetings with the President's COVID team. And as someone who really believes and understands the interpretation of data, every decision that the President, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has made has been based on the evidence of science and the evidence of data. So the assertion that it is gaffe instance simply implies that, you know, the understanding of the data has not been clear, at least to you, and you need to be able to look at really the evidence. To say that the rates have increased in the past week than it was in the first couple of weeks simply also means that there is more testing today than there was 8-10 weeks ago. So the rate of testing obviously will mean when you are searching for the disease, you are more likely to find more. But what we need to look at is the totality of the data. While I am not a health expert, I am at least a scientist when it comes to data analysis. And so if you look at the number of cases, and then you look at the number of recoveries, and most importantly, if you look at the deaths and the fact that most of the deaths have been also attached to comorbidity, then you need to be able to at least look carefully and interpret that data effectively.
What do you make?
Because
yes, quickly.
Yeah. So no, well, it's not, almost everything he said is absolutely incorrect. One, the point that was just made regarding the time span involved, for instance, was completely adverse to what the facts show. What the facts show is that even though we raised testing right after lockdown, the number of tests being conducted recently are fewer. The number of tests being conducted are fewer than what it was during rundown. So we've gone from something like 12,000 tests a day at the peak of that action to something in the region of about 3,000 a day. So I can't understand how you could say that the number of tests have risen and therefore infection detection has risen. We also know the positivity rate. When you do a specific subset of tests, you know how many of them are testing positive. We know that has also risen. We also know that there's an upward trend in active cases, etc. So I don't understand when he says that. I mean, he's making conclusive statements that are not, in alignment with the data.
Right. Now,
I'm surprised unfortunately, that will be his position. But the data.
No, that's
but the matter he raises about the number of tests, I suppose you will agree that you got that wrong.
No, I didn't get that wrong.
We have not increased our testing.
At no point have we tested. You can go to Noguchi and look at it. 12,000 people per day. You know, in the whole testing regime that we've had, we've only have about 220 or 230,000 tests. So at no point during the lockdown, if we're doing 12,000 a day over a 21
that was statements that were made by the scientists themselves, that they had risen, their capacity had risen.
I would like you to look at the evidence of the statements. I think that we need to be very careful because we're also communicating to the Ghanaian people. And
so what was the test right after lockdown? What is the test now?
The government never said that they were doing 12,000 a day. At the maximum, it was about 5,000 or 6,000 during the tracing time. You know, so I think that the main thing is we need to understand data.
So have the number of tests gone down or not?
The number of tests is based on contact tracing.
No, has it gone down or not? That is fact.
This is just
no. The fact is that you test based on contact tracing.
No.
So
let's answer the specific question.
No,
let's answer the specific question, which has generated this controversy now.
But
his point is that the number of tests has gone down than it was at the time we were seeking to ramp up.
The number of tests,
yes.
You see, that question, it's not an absolute answer question. Your number of tests is determined by the cases that you are identifying. So if this week I have identified 10 people that I'm doing contact tracing for, then those 10 people's contact tracing may give me, say, 200 or 250
I take it that you don't want to answer that.
No, it's because it's not a yes or no. The whole thing is
let me bring Mr. Abochi in quickly on his view also of the reaction, particularly by religious organizations, and then we can move on to the schools. And I would like you also to look at the measures that religious organizations are supposed to take if they are congregating, whether it is feasible at all. Hello, Mr. Abochi.
Yes, good morning, Samson.
Good morning. You'll be attending Mass tomorrow?
No, I'm not.
Why? You're a Catholic. The Catholic Church says your church may be opened for Mass.
Yes, it is opened. It is a right that is left to me to exercise, and I have to exercise my right in the best possible, in a manner that best possibly safeguards not only my own interest, but advances the purpose for which I even visit the church in the first place. I think one reality is true, and that reality is the disease, as was discovered some months ago, hasn't changed in character. Things have not necessarily improved, even in other parts of the world. It may appear that we have been able to combat it to a point because of interventionist measures that were put in place, but the disease itself hasn't changed for us to change the circumstances for which the interventions were put in place. The relaxation is absolutely sensible, in my opinion, if you ask me. But the manner of implementing that relaxation is left to the individual churches and left to the individual entities that have the right to exercise. I do not think that. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I do not think that as we speak, the churches have been able to put in place. And again, from everything we're hearing, it doesn't seem that the churches are in a position to implement that. But the president has done what I think is absolutely correct, i.e., leave the option to the churches subject to certain specific interventions that are supposed to be put in place. So some may be able to do that, others may not. But the option has been left to the churches and the rights exercisers. We are the rights exercisers. So the option has been left to us to exercise those rights. The difficulty with that is clearly the fact that the churches in particular are not in the habit of turning people away. And so once you have a restricted number of people who can enter the church, you are essentially asking the churches to come out with standard criteria for determining who should come in and who should not once the number of a certain number is exceeded. And that's difficult because it's not something they've been used to doing. That is one difficulty. The second difficulty is, let's be honest, I'm not sure that the churches have been preparing for this, i.e. the interventions that need to be put in place. And so in light of that, if you ask me whether I'm going to church tomorrow, I think that's the reason I'm not, because I haven't received sufficient assurances of the requisite safeguards having been put in place that would guarantee my safety once I'm in church praying. And that's the reason I'm staying away. So it's a right I have to exercise. It's a right I can, but I won't.
Right. I've read, for example, the circular as issued by the priests, as in the Catholic Church, who have come together and decided what to do. And they say, for example, that first you must disinfect. After disinfection, you must put all the protocols in place. You must admit 100. The president says 100. Once you admit 100, you do only an hour, and then the directive about communion cannot be complied with, cannot be compromised, because that's such a sacred process in delivering the communion. You cannot say it should be put somewhere at the gate for some people to come pick it up. I know the other churches who are also fighting even the collection thing, that you put the collection bowl outside for people to put the collection in. Then after you are done with your hour, there's 1 hour time for another period of disinfection, so to speak. They may use alcohol rub to clean the places nicely for the next group to come in. If the next group finishes, you repeat the same thing. 1 hour period before the next group comes. There are no Sunday schools to be organized, so you go to church without your kids. You think this is practical?
We need to remember, first of all, that the presidential directives are made pursuant to an executive instrument. They are therefore legal directives. They have to be complied with in the manner in which the directives are issued. Now, the directives, as I understand them, are not issued in the alternative. They are issued as a cumulative set of directives, so they have to be complied with fully. So a church cannot say that I will open, I will disinfect, I will do one or two of the other directives, but for a particular one, I will not comply, or we will not comply.
No, if I may give a little clarity here, on the point of how to deliver communion, the understanding is that they have met with the minister, and it's been agreed that the manner in which the minister spoke about it is not practicable. It cannot be done. So that one has been compromised together with the minister's understanding. And your reference to EI. Once again, the EI is not ready. The president spoke, but the EI is not ready.
Okay, so what it means is that by the time the EI comes out, it has to reflect what has been agreed. I'm just saying basically in the abstract that if those directives are issued and they are issued pursuant to the EI, we cannot cherry pick, or we cannot apply with them in a hanky-panky manner. But again, I understand all these things. Look, let's be real practical about this. There's a standard means by which the disease is transmitted. This has been agreed on and agreed to by the medical experts, and this is facts, or these are facts out there. We don't have to belabor the point. If therefore a particular mode of conducting religious services has the propensity to lead to the spread of the disease, I do not think it's a behavior that ordinarily should be condoned or accepted. And the nature of this disease, because it's a public health thing, it's not confined to a particular place. So one church's failure to comply, for example, the directives, leading to a spread of the disease, even in that church, is invariably endangering all of us because it's going to come out into the public space. So the point I was just trying to make in the end is these directives have been issued, if you like, as a compromise from the initial directives, which are totally restrictive of religious services. I think moving forward, the president has just recognized one reality, and that reality is this: the disease is going to be with us for some time to come. In light of the fact that the disease is going to be with us for some time to come, from all the prognosis of the medical experts, the WHO, etc., I think there has been the recognition that it's important to restore human rights and a sense of normality for some time. Now, in doing that, one has to be careful not to restore things to the status quo, given the fact that the disease is not gone away, and therefore we may end up completely just undoing everything that has been done so far. So there has been a very graduated, phased approach to the restoration of normality.
All right.
Now, that is what I see or I sense is being done. But the difficulties are clearly some of the things you've mentioned. And the point I mentioned, that the churches are not in the habit of rationing the number of people who come to worship at a particular point in time. So this probably will be the very first time in their history they have to do this. I do not think that they have the mechanisms in place to achieve this. Secondly, the instructions that have been given in terms of the sanitation instructions, the sanitizing and the disinfections and all that. Again, I do not think that there are structured processes in place to ensure that each church is complying. The difficulty with all these is that we have thousands of churches out there, and we have even many more branches of these churches around the place. How do we police such a measure? And if we have mass infraction, which is likely again, how do we execute compliance? Right. Is compliance going to lead to arrests and people being forced into line to ensure that they comply with all this? So there are practical challenges in the way of implementing this, and I'm not sure if we've thought about all these from the various angles.
Okay, thank you very much. And Bright, the president also, thought about the possibility of us getting some spike once this is done. So he said there is a readiness. Once we discover that something has gone wrong, we will take the immediate steps to check it. So is the reason the people who come to the service, the 100 people, must put their names down. So in case anything happens, we can quickly contact trace. If a church is serious, or a mosque or any other religious organization is serious, they can comply with this very easily and go ahead with their worship, can't they? And we have seen some who are demonstrating. They have bought the temperature guns. They've done all the things. We have seen some of them simulating on television for us to see that it's possible.
Yes, I think one thing I definitely agree with Mr. Buchi about is that we've come to the conclusion, all of us, that we don't have a silver bullet to this pandemic. And attempts to suppress it completely are not very realistic. So the measures are the best, they are satisfying measures. They are the best optimal measures available given the circumstances, which is to attempt somewhat to remove some of the repressions and some of the restrictions on people's rights, but not to make it unfettered. So I completely agree that these measures in the way that they've been couched are reasonable. Of course, the first attempt at formulating them has not met with, I'm not going to say approval, but certainly it has not met with the satisfaction of the religious leaders. And some of them have said that unless additional clarifications are done, they're not going to meet. But we do also have religious organizations in this country who have said that notwithstanding the civic measures, they intend as religious leaders to instruct their flocks to remain at home. So that is also interesting.
They are in the majority.
But your specific question was about the management of the process. I think it's very much the case that what has to happen is that government has to try and spread out infections as much as it can. Whether or not that is working is where I disagree with my brother in the studio, in the sense that there isn't any modeling that I am privy to that suggests that the non-pharmaceutical interventions that are currently in place are having the effect of stretching. So we would need to see more efforts made at better understanding of the transmission dynamics. How disease is moving from one part to the other, where the hotspots are emerging and why. We will need at least a few published papers from the COVID-19 committee. They don't have to be peer-reviewed papers. But at the very least, some published papers that the rest of us, in some great detail, can begin to rely upon. The challenge we have now at present is that we don't have these papers. Nobody has published anything that says, here is what we've studied, here are the data. I've been looking at other countries, and the number of published white papers by government committees, scientific committees, it's unbelievable. I was just looking at the UK situation not too long ago. But take South Africa, which is much closer to us in terms of the circumstances. And they have had several published papers by their scientific committees telling you how the spread is happening and how they intend to stretch out the infectivity rate and the likes of it. So without that, I can only say, and I can only repeat, and this is not being derogatory, this is just being factual, that we are relying more on gut instinct, which in political management is allowed. You are allowed to use your instinct and your judgment. But that is what we largely rely on. I know for sure, speaking to health specialists in this country, that they have seen an increase in the burden at OPDs, which already are somewhat constrained, but also in admissions. One of the things that will happen is that we look at people in critical care and people with severe disease and then mortalities. We're not looking at people on admission in general. That information is not being provided. So we are relying on our own surveys of medical practitioners in this country, and they are telling us that admissions are rising and people reporting with moderate illnesses is rising. We're not tracking those. So I think that we have to start increasing the range and the spectrum of policy tracking, outcomes tracking the outcomes, and some of these will require new indicators.
So I'm happy that my brother is coming around to the idea that it should be science, because the fact that he's now asking, just because we have not seen the data doesn't mean that the science is not there. So what he's asking
for
that
he should publish papers.
He's asking
but that doesn't mean that
so the idea is that he's coming around to the idea that let's look at the data.
So from Monday the 15th of June, the president says, with engagement of the teacher unions, whom he has enjoyed a lot of cooperation, schools are begin to reopen to allow for final year, junior high and senior high and university students to resume classes ahead of the conduct of their respective exit examinations. Final year students are to report to the universities on the 15th of June. Final year senior high school SHS 3 students, together with SHS 2 gold track students, on the 22nd of June, and final year junior high school JHS 3 students on the 29th of June. JHS 3 classes will comprise a maximum of 30 students. SHS classes, a maximum of 25 students. And university lectures will take place with half the size, the class size. You think this is practical?
Yes, it's very practical, and this is an area where we've had a lot of consultations. It's not just the unions. The president mentioned the unions because, of course, they were a key factor in terms of the contribution to what needs to happen in terms of reopening. But we have consulted with CHAS, which are the Conference of Heads of Assisted Senior High Schools or Secondary Schools. We've consulted with COPS, which are the headmasters for basic schools. We've consulted with our regional directors of education, our district directors of education. We've consulted with our universities, vice chancellors, a lot of consultation. But in addition, there's been a lot of consultation with CSOs. We've worked very closely with GNEC as a body. We've worked with our development partners. And we have also looked at evidence in terms of what is happening elsewhere. And we all looked at the possibility that if you bring the final year students, which is the president's wise decision that let's bring the final year students because they have an exit exam to take. Let's look at the protocols that are in place. In Ghana, we say social distancing is 1 meter. And 1 meter for most of us is about an arm stretch. And that you look at the other...
1 meter when you're in the mask.
Yes, okay. It's about an arm stretch. And then we look at the other things that must be in place, that these can be done. Based on that, we also then looked at the fact that we need to reduce our class sizes. So if you're only going to have your final year students in school, and even in the schools that run double track, your gold track Form 2 students, who were critical because they were about 6 weeks behind the green track, that if you have all those students in school, you have enough space to spread around. You know, let's, for example, take junior high schools. JHS 1 and JHS 2 are not in school. So even in schools that have, say, 70 or 80 students in a class, you split it 3 times and you have less than 30. But then splitting it 3 times will almost be like replicating JHS 1, 2, and 3. The teachers rotate just like they usually do, and they are able to teach all of the students. So those are the practical things.
That comes with the need for more supply of teachers to take care of them?
No, because JHS 1 and JHS 2 are not in school.
Okay.
Because in every junior high school, we have between 8 and 10 teachers based on the arrangement of the junior high school. And they usually teach 3 classes. Now you are asking JHS 1 to not be in, JHS 2 to not be in. So even if you split your JHS 3 group into 3, it's like replicating JHS 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So the same number of teachers can teach based on your timetable. So those are things that we've done the modeling, we've looked at the application, and we've looked at the sensibility. We've also worked very closely with WIEC because we needed to understand what modalities needed to be in place to make sure that the exams happen safely. We had to look at what was left in terms of academic work that needed to be done and what preparation students need to do to take the exams. So those things have been well thought through. Luckily for us, the Honorable Minister for Education had been working with us even before the President's announcement to begin to look at what are some of the things that we need to look at. And since the President's announcement, every decision that we have taken in Ghana Education Service, you know, has been to work on how do we live with what everybody calls the new normal, you know, and how do we ensure that this happens. And the President's decision that bring final year students to school in the 3 different levels and bring the gold track to school, that was even some of the suggestions that CHAS itself came up with. You know, the unions themselves came up with those suggestions. We looked at what else was working in other places.
So in the universities, they are supposed to do half the class size.
Yes.
But for JHS, it will have to be not more than 30 students.
Yes.
For SHS, it will be a maximum of 25 students. Why the differentiation to have half the class of a university situation where we know that the numbers are huge? You could have as many as upwards of 400 in one class.
Yes, but that also means that you have large lecture theaters as opposed to junior and senior high schools where you seem to have more of a classroom structure. And so, you know, the idea behind half the class in all levels is that you want to reduce the congestion in your classroom by 50%, you know, and the 30 in a junior high school, where we were looking at the average number of students in a class, which was hovering between 55 and 65. So if you halve it, it's about 30. And then for senior high schools, on average, we have some that are a little higher, some that are way lower, but on average, you're looking at about 50 to 52 students.
And everybody will be supplied with masks, reusable.
Every student will be supplied with 3 reusable face masks, washable and reusable face masks. Every teacher and every non-teaching staff that must come to school will also be supplied with same 3 reusable face masks. Every single school, public and private, will be supplied with at least the minimum of what the scientists are saying is required. Hand washing facilities. So we're going to provide Veronica buckets for every school, whether they have sinks or not. We're going to provide water, even with schools that have difficulty in terms of access to water. Water will be supplied with coordination from district directors to the schools. Soap will be supplied to every single school. In addition, hand sanitizers for intermittent sanitization of your hands.
And they are not supposed to be breaks.
In our junior high schools, what we are saying is that they would only be in school for 4 hours a day. They will start at 9 and they'll complete at 1. This is because the health and well-being checks that need to happen. We are also supplying every school with temperature guns. So they need to take their time to do those health and well-being checks. Now, we know that we do not want large gatherings. And so they come to school for 4 hours, they do their 45-minute class, and then 15-minute break, more controlled in their class session. They do 4 sessions, by 1 o'clock they close, they go home. That's the junior high schools. Senior high schools, they stay a little longer, they're a bit more mature, but the day schools, they follow those same procedures, they go home.
All right.
The boarding schools, of course, because we're going to put them in the boarding facilities, then we have different arrangements. But in all of our schools, we are also identifying a space where you can do isolation of students should you see that the temperatures are going up or people are exhibiting certain symptoms. And we are providing training to our staff to be able to at least do those basic things. But more importantly, we are also doing the mapping of every single school in this country, which actually started under Dr. Nsiasari when he was Director General of the Ghana Health Service. Mapping of every single school to a health facility, whether public or private health facility, to make sure that each school has a health facility that can support them in this period. Of course, this is to ensure that the students who need to exit can exit. Otherwise, you'd have a bigger crisis on your hands, because in the next academic year, whenever that begins, you would have anywhere between 500,000 to 600,000 cohort of KG students who must come into school.
Right. Now, Bright, the same apprehension, perhaps, maybe I should say, or hesitation that you and other people would have about reopening the churches or religious, places of worship should be the same for the schools, isn't it? And you had mentioned, and the question came up, which we were dealing with. If you look at the Ghana Health Service data, you will see that even the positivity rate is also on the rise. It was 7 last week, and it's 7% last week, and it is 19 this week. The point, therefore, is we are at a higher risk then, are we not?
So, I mean, my good friend in the studio tends to say that we should take the assertions for fact. If you say that we are looking at data, then we are looking at data. If we say that we are following the science, then we are following the science. No, I don't think it works that way. I mean, I think the nature of accountability in political office is that you go out of your way to assure people that you are doing so by providing transparency. So if indeed you're working on models, publish them. Put them out, let people read them. I have been doing policy analysis in this country now for 15 years. I was just checking last time when I became an adjunct fellow at Imani, and I've seen governments come and go. And the one thing that the Ghanaian governments refuse to accept is that you need to be pinned down to commitments in writing. This thing where we do government by oral culture worry all of us, because it becomes very difficult to pin them to specific commitments. it becomes, oh, the minister said this on this radio station and this other special assistant said this on this TV station. It's very difficult that way. So if you say you have models about how you're going to contain transmissions in school, publish them. Let me give you an example. Learning Policy Institute, Brooklyn's Institute, the Brookings Institution, and a number of other organizations have done comparative matrices across the world of how schools are reopening. So of the 194 countries where we had comprehensive school shutdowns, about 134 now are 134 are still shut. So we have almost 60. And Ghana tends to be on the, I would say, cutting edge when it comes to reopening and loosening restrictions, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that we have a bit more appetite for risk. And if it's informed risk, that's reasonable, right? The challenge that I have is that when I look at these other countries, South Korea, Taiwan, the UK, Denmark, etc., I've done a literature review, I have extensive bodies of evidence about exactly how particular decisions are taken to the exclusion of other decisions. So for instance, the so-called gold standard, which is the alternating streams model, I think I've seen Professor Kamesh done modeling around 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, has now been fairly validated as the most robust. Though obviously you have to collect more data. But the assumption is that given the behavior of the disease, its gestation period, etc., 2 weeks alternating tends to be such that if there are symptoms, you are likely to catch enough of them in the house before they come back in and infect. We are doing continuous streaming, so there's no alternating. If they go in 6 weeks, it's throughout, 6 weeks throughout. Well, you could have an argument about that, but I would like to see some published work that says, look, we looked at evidence in terms of the disease behavior in Ghana, and we are quite fine with the continuous stream. We don't want to do alternating, because actually when we look at our situation in Ghana, we think that will exacerbate the problem. I would like that. I would appreciate that. Unfortunately, the tendency tends to be that we should take people at their word, as opposed to showing us the analysis and the reasoning. The second thing that I've also discovered is not in the public information, and that he may well say that they have that information, but we don't know about it, which is problematic. But one thing I've discovered...
But we also ought to know that the president said in due course, before the schools reopen, the education ministry will bring out the specific...
Yeah, but those are guidelines.
You know,
I'm talking of the evidence that backs the guidelines.
All right.
Those you don't wait till... It's not necessarily going to go into those studies. Those studies will have been conducted 3 months into... 3 months ago to now, to begin to have an idea of how the dynamics will. Let me give an example. In Scandinavia...
How do you apply, you know, studies done 3 months ago to a disease?
No, continuous studies.
Okay.
Not that you do it 3 months ago. Okay. But 3 months ago to now,
right,
when we had our first infection, we should have started studying this problem. On our Zoom, we have, because the government spokesperson makes it very clear that they are following these database principles. So you have to assume the studies are being done. My argument is publish them so there's transparency, and the analysts can look at them. If you take Scandinavia, for instance, one of the things that they have to look at very carefully, about 3 things. One was, are young people more likely to be vectors, as in to be super transmitting? They carry the virus, they don't get ill, so they just give it to a lot of people. Is that true or not? And there's been a lot of studies that have now given, shown that generally they are vectors, but they're not necessarily super transmitting. Do we have that data in Ghana? Can the government spokesperson tell me that they have data about that fact and it has informed the analysis going into this? Probably not. We know, for instance, that therefore in some countries have meant that junior students have been asked to go and senior students have been asked to remain in the home, because they've been informed by the data.
Right.
We know, for instance, that in some countries the determination is that if somebody is found ill, so he talked about the temperature guns. So if you have an index of suspicion, we know your temperature is elevated, and we suspect you are ill. He talks about the quarantine measure. But what if there is a test and the person is detected positive? In most countries that I know, there's a shutdown. And in some countries, when you have had shutdowns in 30% of schools, there is a total shutdown of all schools. So the government sets the benchmark. If there is this number of infections detected in the school, we will close the school. If there is this number of schools where you have infections, we will close all schools in this municipality. Those benchmarks are then guided by data. So the question that I have is that, do we have those benchmarks? And if we have them, why don't you publish them? Yeah. Because they all help with the debate.
But again, are they not able to look at the examples you are using to determine how we should also go about it? So if you look at how China is doing, and they started gradual reopening in March. You have Denmark that opened in April 15. You had Norway, April 20.
I've looked at all those.
Yes.
But I've looked
Singapore,
also at the
among
studies
others.
that back those.
And they are very clear about how you go about it. First, there's a health screening, temperature checks at least twice daily upon arrival in school. You have the quarantine and school closure policies. They quarantine you if you are found to be sick until symptoms have resolved. There's also the group size, and they are looking at group size from between 50 to 30 in some areas.
But you know, in Denmark, they decided that they're going to use primarily outdoor for 55% of activity as much as they can, right?
And like they are seeking to do in Ghana.
It's not just classroom.
And like they are seeking to do in Ghana, meal times, people are to eat at their desks. Unless there's a properly designed, nicely done cafeteria for them to do. And if in Taiwan, if a class is suspended 14 days, if one case is confirmed, and then the whole school is suspended if for 14 days, if you have more than 2 cases.
So all of these are based on analytics designed from a study of the evidence in the literature. So you say that our scientists publish 5 papers, 3 of them suggest that young people are not super transmitting. We think because of that, we're going to do it this way. You say our scientists or our scholars have had these number of papers published. On a meta review, we've concluded that this is the right direction. You state that in the paper, in the white paper, you state that because of this and that, we are inclined to take these measures. And my concern is that we're not seeing those papers. So we're just having to either accept the government's word at face value, or keep whining, as we usually do, and there is no meeting of minds. I'm not here to oppose government measures. I'm here to have a reasoned debate as a policy analyst, somebody who was taking a career direction, that I'll spend some of my time analyzing government policy for the benefit of people who don't have the time. There are people that are too busy to go and read every single government paper, right? My job is to read as many of these papers as possible, so that when I make a comment, I'm making a comment guided by the facts that are there. And my argument is that there isn't sufficient policy transparency. So one, we don't know the studies backing these decisions. And once the decisions have been taken, we don't know the outcomes. Because nobody's publishing the monitoring and evaluation reports. We've had a Minister of Monitoring and Evaluation. And for the vast number, I would say 99% of major policy decisions, this body, this ministry, has not published regular evaluation results for the public.
Okay. See, I must quickly say this. That number one, maybe on June 2nd, my friend was not paying attention when the minister in his presentation presented the modeling, transcripts, right? And so you cannot say that just because you didn't pay attention.
No, I've read the transcript.
You reading the transcript is not seeing the modeling. The minister,
but why is the modeling? The modeling should be in the speech, or it should be on another paper.
The minister presented the modeling, and just because you have not seen it, I worked on it.
No, he presented it where? Where is the modeling? On your computer?
No, he presented it at Meet the Press, and it was shared.
So where is it?
It is shared.
And I said I saw those transcripts, and they don't include any model.
You did not see the presentations and the modeling itself.
No. What was shared to the press has been delivered to me.
If you want,
I'll look at it
right now.
But it's not in the public domain.
If you look at it, so the modeling was done. That's number one. Number two. You cannot sit there and compare what is happening in Ghana to Norway and other places. We are tired of
194 countries. That's what I said.
Let me.
It's not just Norway.
All of your examples have been Norway, the Scandinavian countries, and all.
I've mentioned South Africa.
We also do.
I've mentioned Rwanda as well.
Hold on a minute and let me speak.
Okay.
When you were speaking, I didn't interrupt you.
That's point. Good.
We also do know that when there is good ventilation, that's number one, that the disease doesn't have the same rate of transmission. We know number two, that when the disease or when the virus is exposed to ultraviolet light, which some people made fun of it in the media based on another head of state's comments, that the virus is weakened. So you cannot sit there and look at Norway's modeling and saying they have brought the children outside. Which of our schools have air conditions in the classrooms? We have very high ventilated classrooms. And so those are things that we have looked at. And those are things that we all know based on the data, that based on those things, you can make decisions around reopening.
I didn't hear him say, if you can't bring the children outside,
no, but what he said,
I'm giving you examples of arguments based on data.
I think we'll do our audience, a good service if we don't pitch this against you have said this or not.
No, but then the truth of the matter is we're here to educate the audience.
He didn't say,
and so we need to be careful.
Okay, he only spoke about the modeling that he hasn't seen, which I haven't seen.
Yes,
I'm just hearing you mention that it has been available.
So ask for it rather than say that I haven't seen it and so.
just hold on. Let me bring Dina Bochi on. So, as we find, most particularly of the tertiary institutions, I think they are going into their week of exam. They had already engaged the students virtually. Do you find that this is the reason they don't seem to be in a hurry to implement fully the ease restrictions of bringing the students back to campus? For example, University of Ghana, we have seen how they are approaching it. Those who have already gone through the virtual learning over the period, they will continue, and then they will take their exams as has been planned virtually.
Well, I think the tertiary institutions are probably approaching this cautiously. Now, as someone who is in a tertiary institution myself, what I sense is the principle that the physical gathering on campus poses a risk which is uncertain, an uncertain risk which the universities rather do without. And therefore, if they can actually reach their students and conduct exams and all that online, subject to the minor imperfections, that is preferable to getting them back on campus, subject to all the potential risks, which, again, as I said, remain uncertain. But if you allow me, let's be clear about everything happening. I think we're dealing with so many tensions, and I'm just responding to what my two distinguished colleagues in the studio have said. We are responding to two difficult tensions. Now, the main tension being the fact that government obviously faces a difficulty and the challenge of uncertainty. We do not know when this COVID-19 situation is going to end. Within the foreseeable future, we are not likely to invent any perfect intervention that would deal with the virus in a manner that would allow us to go back to life as it used to be. In light of that difficulty, there must be interventions, and no intervention is likely to be perfect. So invariably, government's intervention at the moment has said that there's some imperfections. They're difficult. A lot of them are difficult to implement. But it's unlikely we are going to have any intervention which is perfect. I think the only intervention which may be perfect is a complete lockdown, that we're all at home. Even that, we have breaches here and there. So there's that difficulty. Now, the other difficulty, and I think so this difficulty I see from my colleague from GS, and then the other difficulty is Bright's difficulty, the difficulties of compliance even within the schools in the light of data, among others. One difficulty you're going to have in this area has to do with the fact that we are dealing primarily with children. I mean, we are dealing primarily with people who haven't attained a certain degree of maturity. Now, this virus appears to operate on the principle that, look, we can be as lucky as we can on so many occasions. The virus needs to be lucky only once. In other words, we can be lucky all the time and make sure that we comply and we do all we have to do, and we wear the mask and we sanitize, we do all the beautiful things we're supposed to do. But just one instance of negligence can result in one contracting the virus. So the virus has to become lucky only once. And if the virus has to become lucky only once, what it means is that with children as we have, it's unlikely we're going to have them behave to the maximum level of perfection in terms of compliance. There'll be some discretion here and there. There'll be some laxities here and there. And the prospect that one child may contract the virus in a school environment within congested spaces, even though we're trying to decongest, but within a confined space. And once you have a certain confinement and a contraction, the prospect that it spreads around, all these are there. If you juxtapose these two tensions, government will have to do its possible best in light of any interventionist measure that is put in place. I see all the things, and listening to, again, my colleague from GES, I get the sense that a lot of work is being done. There's good effort, there's good intention. A lot of effort is being put in this, but we still have to do careful introspection and reflection on these efforts. As I said, given the fact that the possibility exists that just one person's negligence can result in the thing going around within a particular school and then from school to school. But again, we should also remember, and I say this in light of what Bright said, the scientists have mentioned that some countries are actually experimenting with the prospect of what they call herd immunity. Yeah. Maybe in our part of the world, we should start thinking about that. It's one virus in my lifetime, at least from now that it's become a very popular thing we're all following, that we've heard stories about the possibility of governments actually toying with the idea of getting people to go out there and adventure, some adventurism, with a view that by contraction, people would develop immunity. Now, I say this, again, against the background of all the data which is now public from the WHO, among others, that children in particular appear to be resistant to the virus, even though at a point in time there was some unease and disquiet because some children contracted it. But from a population as a whole, and from a proportional analysis of the contraction of people who are younger and those who are older, among others, it appears that children of a certain bracket are resistant to the virus. Is it going to be government policy, for example, to toy with the idea of herd immunity? Let's experiment and see the possibility of a few, some children contracting it and overcoming this, and then really allowing the schools to just operate normally, given the fact that our children may just scale the immunity challenge, and therefore children may not be at risk. Because the difficulty of this is, if this virus remains around for another 2 years, and the prognosis indicates if there's no vaccine, and potentially there may be no vaccine for some time, we can't still go around the way we're going about this in the manner of keeping our kids at home. And that clearly can be, that clearly I see is the difficulty that GES is facing, by reason of which they are coming out with all these interventionist measures in a phased manner for us to see how possible we can get the schools back to normalcy. So I don't think that Bright and my colleague from GS are speaking at opposites. I don't think you really are at opposites. I think the difficulty clearly is the issue of whether we want to take the risk that some people may be afraid of in the circumstances, or whether we should actually even toy with that. And then on the other hand, the argument of whether everything being done is against data, which, in my opinion, respectfully, I do think that there's, the position being taken now is a bit pragmatic and it's nuanced. Every intervention must be nuanced. The implementation challenges are going to be there, but I am unable to see any other perfect modality or any other perfect intervention which may be better than what has been put in place in the circumstances, unless the default option of we should hold on until such further time, which again I see no end in sight with, by reason of everything and the data that we have in the circumstances. So against so much reluctance, I do think that we may probably have to test the prospect of herd immunity, particularly among our younger ones who are in secondary schools.
I think I have to quickly react to Mr. Bochi's point about herd immunity, in the sense that the issue is not necessarily whether or not you have the option to do so, and more about whether that immunity lasts long enough for it to be a truly defensive measure. So what we are seeing, I mean, if you look at flu, which mutates so rapidly, it's not possible to use herd immunity as your fundamental strategy for flu. But luckily, in the case of flu, you've got vaccines for every season and things like that. In this case, where you have no vaccines, but it's not entirely clear that immunity is supposedly long-lasting, a pure herd immunity strategy could prove extremely dangerous if it turns out, for instance, that a virulent strain emerges and your immunity is very short-term. The second point, which I agree with him on, is that indeed, the perfection can be the enemy of the good. So rather than herd immunity, what we are looking at is not necessarily perfection, but very good epidemic management. Now, the point has always been made that we have some of the best epidemiologists working on this. We have some of the best public health scientists working on this. We don't dispute the assertions. The claims that we've been making is that we don't have sufficient information from the government in a published form that you can analyze in order to have confidence in the way the thing is being managed. You see, people have talked about restoring the situation to normalcy. It's not only administrative and political measures that will do that. A lot of it will be sentiment and psychology. People have to feel that they trust that the government has has a handle on the situation. Now, if people don't have that confidence that government has a handle on the situation, you have situations where you have pronounced absenteeism even when you open schools. You have problems where people are not going to the hotels even when you open the hotels, etc. So all you're saying is increase the transparency by publishing more, saying this is how we've come to this conclusion, this is why we think that this approach is better, so that people begin to build more confidence. People like us could do public education in support of government's effort. Right. But without any without the evidence, without the analytical reasoning, it gets much more difficult. That's the point.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. And do some public education. No, because that's why we're here.
Okay, go ahead.
We're not here to do a lot of argument back and forth. We're actually here to educate the public about the decisions that has been taken. So number one, before schools,
and to carry those decisions.
Yes,
that's why we're here.
But number one, before schools are open, there are some conditions that the president has put in place, and we in the Ghana Education
all schools must disinfect.
Number one, there must be disinfection of all schools. Number two, which we talked about, the provision of wash facilities. Number three, schools must be mapped to health facilities, public or private, to make sure that there are some interventions in place. Number four, that we have the right face masking for students. Number five, that we reduce class sizes through splitting of classes. Number six, that we are not going to be doing contact sports and especially sporting activities. Number seven, that while school is in place, at least outside religious activities that come to use our school facilities are going to cease during that period. But in school, the students can continue to do their worship in their classrooms and things like that. Number seven, as you even mentioned, in our dining, students are now going to be doing dining in batches to make sure that they continue to maintain social distancing and things like that. Number eight, that we are not going to allow visitors during the period of time that students are in school, especially in our boarding facilities. So these are some of the measures that we are putting in place. We are doing the disinfection practically because we know that about 7 or 8 of our senior high schools so far were used as isolation centers. And to give people the peace of mind, you provide that disinfection. And that you do the disinfection for every single school in the country, because whether public or private, His Excellency's directives was to close all schools. And so if you're going to open all those schools, you need to provide those things. So some of the measures that give people comfort are in place. Yes, we are looking for CSOs like Imani, to help in the communication, and we are ready to sit with Imani and share all of the things that we need to be able to communicate for them to also interrogate it. As a matter of fact, we wrote an open letter too, and I believe that my friends here at Joy even did a policy dialogue. That policy dialogue came out of our open letter that we wrote around we need to solicit ideas on how we move forward as a country. We received over 20 recommendations around how we open. And His Excellency the President considered all the recommendations that were received. So based on that, that is why we are also using a phased approach. And we need to let the Ghanaian public know that the steps are being put in place to make sure that when your children come to school, the things that we need to do to make sure they are safe and come back to you, we do. But we also need to understand one thing. Every morning, we get in our cars and we go to work. There is the risk of an accident every day. But we take the necessary precautions. We check our tire pressure, we make sure the water is level, we make sure we put on our seatbelts, we make sure we drive the speed limit, we make sure that we look out for other drivers that are out there. So yes, like my friend the Dean said, we cannot expect that there isn't going to be a break. Even the President
Dr. Tando, there are parents who have sent in some questions. And there's a parent who was asking about the transportation.
Yes.
She's concerned about the transportation. So if you don't have some safe transportation for your child, and I'm talking safe transportation about not exactly joining a trotro, but you may be compelled to join a trotro. And if you join trotro, how are you sure that the safety measures are taken in this trotro for your child to be safe?
I believe in terms of the restrictions of movement, the President eased those restrictions with certain things in place in terms of protocols that are supposed to be in place. We are providing the students with masking. And so once the student is in, say, a public transportation, that's really a bit of the senior high schools. For most of the junior high schools, they are usually community schools. And I would say 70 to 80% of those students walk to school anyway. But for those that use public transportation, we are already living in a society now where we move about.
That's right.
We are providing the face masking. We are ensuring that as soon as your child gets out of the car and gets to the school, they wash their hands, they sanitize, and then they do the things they're supposed to do before they get into the classroom. Right. So the movements are already happening. So
do you have a way of ensuring that by the set dates for the schools to resume, every school would have disinfected to start with, first thing?
Yes. His Excellency the President has put together a committee that is working on the reopening. It is headed by the senior minister. and the logistics part is headed by the Director General for Military Logistics. My Director General for Ghana Education Service sits on that committee. The Director General for Ghana Health Service sits on that committee. And they are working through, beginning next week, fumigation and disinfection is going to start in all universities because they are the first to reopen.
Zoom Lion has done a bit of it.
They did bed back
some
fumigation for us already in some of our senior high schools. But it will begin with the universities. Then the next step is the fumigation and disinfection.
And they would have received all the PPEs that you are talking about.
Yes, we can assure, because there is no way that we will let students come to school if they don't have the PPEs.
No, even in hospitals there were certain situations.
But in our schools we're not going to be doing that.
Okay.
We can assure you that until your child receives the necessary PPE, until your schools have the Veronica buckets and the water, the soaps,
and finally, when is the guidelines from the Ministry of Education coming out? And I'm concerned about this because as I get ready to do a show like this, often I'm looking for every information I can get. So, for example, the President did this on Sunday. And normally after he's done it, and there is supposed to be an EI, I would frequent the government press because that's where you get a copy. And I buy them. Sometimes I'll do the whole week and it's not available. And when you mention it, some people feel you don't know what you're talking about. So there's an EI that's supposed to be out for this particular one, which is, it will be EI number 134. It will be Gazette dated the 1st of June. But as we speak, it's not ready. So you find people being handicapped. Question is, how soon will yours be in?
We are having our series of meetings beginning on Monday at 9 a.m. with our regional directors. We have a draft policy guideline for our schools, our heads of schools, our regional directors, and our district directors, as well as draft policy guidelines for our teachers and our students/parents.
Okay.
We have the first draft. We are now going to sensitize that draft with our regional directors, our district directors, and then we will publish those drafts at least by next Friday. The first set of guidelines for teachers, for heads of schools, for regional directors and district directors will be out, as well as guidelines, to help our students. We would also let the public to know that once you begin to go on Ghana Learning TV next week, there will begin to be public service announcements. And we are looking to work with other CSOs like Imani if they want to help in the public sensitization, to work with them to do that. But we want to make sure that information gets out to everybody. So at least by next Friday, those guidelines to heads, to district directors, regional directors and such, as well as guidelines to parents and students will be out.
But all things being equal, the GES is ready and you are going to roll out the phase reopening in the manner as announced by the President.
We are absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So Dr. Tando has done his public sensitization work, and as I've said, we also have a public education mandate. But we also have a policy critique mandate, which the party doesn't like.
Of course.
But the truth of the matter is that we insist that there has to be clarity on whether or not there will be random testing in schools, whether or not if a student or a pupil is found to have the infection, there will be closures or restrictions, whether or not if a certain proportion of schools begin to record infections, there will be a reversal of the policy.
What will happen? Okay.
What will be the benchmark and the threshold for each infection level to determine the next course of action? Okay. These are important and they help in building confidence.
Do we have any ideas? We're breaking here, but do we have any ideas? Like I said, in other countries, we've looked at a number of learning institutions across the globe. You find that if there is one person who is, confirmed to have gotten it, a whole class is suspended. Then if you have 2 or more, then the entire school is closed down.
Parent access. Yes. You have to have rules also on parent access.
Do we have any idea what it would take for a classroom to be suspended, for a school to close down?
We are based on our guidelines that will be coming out. Those same international benchmarkings are going to be used. Okay. Because we live in an international community. Right. Now, quickly, in terms of parent access, for the time that the students are in school, I have cousins that go to senior high schools. all of them, I'm able to speak to them through their house-masters. So those same modes of communication will continue.
So will you insist that all these students become boarding for this period?
Okay. In the schools
that really,
not all schools.
And that really is the international standard. No family members past entry.
Exactly.
Let me get Abuchi. I thought you wanted to say something before we take a break.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Abuchi. Okay. Have we lost Kofi Abuchi on the line? Okay. Yes.
Samson, okay.
Thank you.
I heard you prompt. You wanted to say something before we conclude this subject.
Yes, Samson. I wanted to suggest to Dr. Tando that if they haven't checked on reasons that accounted for countries that initially opened or reopened schools recently, just about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, reopened schools but were forced to reclose them. It would be good to do some learning on what accounted for that. It will be a good experience for us not to repeat that. I think if they haven't done that already, I'm sure it will be useful. So just a prompt.
All right. Thank you very much. And this is where we take a break. And when we return, we will be dealing with the questions of the new register. They are exchanging information as to assist how to look for some information to assist the whole process. And this is the beauty of it. So, Dr. Tando, thank you very much for your time. Mr. Simmons will remain with us. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
I hear you suggest that you are not certain that you intend to do this process.
Well, yeah, what I wanted to say is that our main focus is that if the pandemic gives us opportunity, because as I said, we have been talking to the health experts and the other stakeholders. If in 2 months time it goes down, that we argue that it's okay or it's safe for us, we can go ahead. And in view of that, we are procuring a lot of PPEs and the rest, so that if it subsides and we argue that it has subsided, we are buying a lot of PPEs for our staff. We will do the sanitation. No, if you, I think 4 days ago, South Korea had an election, and if you monitored it, they use a lot of spacing or whatever. But what we are saying that for
there are countries that have postponed their elections in the lockdown.
Yes, even in Africa. So if it subsides, the Electoral Commission is not taking decisions in isolation. We are in consultation with health experts and the rest. So we will not take a decision when they have not been advised to do so.
Right.
And we want everybody to know that it's not that we are insensitive to the price. Because I myself will not be comfortable, any of my regions or myself, being infested. You understand? So we are taking all the precautions that we want to take. But the case is that if in 2 months' time, it will be stress on us, but we can still compare the register. If that one fails, then people we will look at we have done a lot of research work, and we have some paper to that effect.
Okay.
And what we are saying in that case, we may use the old register, but that also means that we need to do some cleaning. We need to do some validation.
Okay, so you just preempted my next question there. You are saying that there's a possibility you will use the present register.
And with some validation, cleaning, and the rest. And that will also mean maybe amending the law. Because if you are to do the validation, what it will mean is that it should be compulsory exhibition. If you don't go for validation, your name should be deleted. And in that case, we will have to amend the law. So, and if you are talking of doing the validation, to mean that people will also come in, so human contact will still be there.
We are not in normal times, as you may have heard the president say.
Yes.
So why are you not rather focusing on this alternative?
Yes, I'm saying that if the alternative also means limited registration and validation, which also brings human contact, right? So there's no way, whether new or old, you can avoid human contact.
I see. You're welcome back. And you just heard Dr. Srebor Kweku, who is director at the Electoral Commission, and he spoke to us on the 18th of April at a time when they seem not to have been too sure if they would go ahead with the registration exercise for a new voters register. But as you know now, the EC is set. Actually, this week, it conducted a pilot to test its systems and has issued a statement in which it says that the process was very successful, except in the Western region where there was some hitch at the start. Otherwise, everything has been smooth sailing. So it is ready to register about or more than 13 million Ghanaians. Earlier, the suggestions were that the EC was expecting to register some, 18, 17 or so. It says it is looking to register 13 million plus Ghanaians. It is hoping that it will use one of the BVDs or the systems for the registration process to register at each point for each day about 100 people. And in the process, in 21 days, it would have achieved the numbers that it is expecting. Right. So let's get back to this issue. And I must announce that the EC and my production had made attempts to get the Electoral Commission to be represented for this discussion. Unfortunately, they have been unresponsive. So we will continue. It's a bit unfortunate, but sometimes it does appear that holders of public office do not seem to appreciate that they have a constitutional duty fundamental to the citizens to give them information and to be explaining the decisions that they take on platforms such as these, which are for the entire nation, so to speak. All right, anyway, we'll go ahead. Now, on the 18th of April, you were in the studio, and Kofi Abochi and also H. Kwesi Prempeh were on Zoom when we discussed the voters register issue.
It's a pet course of mine.
Right. And I remember that we spoke to you partly as representing the over 24 CSOs that were against the new voters register. Among the reasons you gave at the time, you said that because of the pandemic, the procedures will become lengthy because you need to undergo the various measures, sanitizing, spacing, among others. And therefore, minimum, it will take 70 days for the EC to complete the exercise to capture the number of people that it was expecting to do. You also stated that we're 8 months behind schedule. That 60%, you suspected that you said it was extremely suspect that the EC didn't want to include the voters register, the voters ID card as an identification document, and that the cases in court, you had information or your bioanalysis, there will be some 60% in favor that it might get some success. Then, very importantly, you said there is research, including by John Jacobs, that shows that putting your finger, on the machines, the scanners, significantly elevates the possibility of transmission of the virus. These haven't changed, have they?
No.
The EC, now we know, is going ahead. So
and they didn't show up, right? Just as they didn't show up when the National House of Chiefs called them. Now, we have the EC, and people blame the political parties for this. But if you look carefully, all the political parties have remained very consistent in their demands as far as the register matters are concerned for more than a decade. The MPP is still litigating Abu Ramadan 1, 2, and 3. That's what they are doing. They claim that they made in Abu Ramadan 1, wanting the old voter ID card to be struck out, wanting the register to be recompiled. It's the same position that they've held. The NDC continues to maintain its position of wanting the register to remain as it is, etc. The only organization that has flip-flopped at every turn is the EC. And let's be very candid. This is not about specific individuals in the EC. It is an institution that, as at presently constituted and as has been historically constituted, is not very fit for purpose. And the reason I say this is very simple. Go and read the allegations surrounding the EC's conduct during the Ramadan episode, the Abu Ramadan Evans Nimakon Kwesi Danso episode. You will recognize that someone who is not a very high official in the presidency said he had recordings of 2 EC deputy chairpersons, Sulamadu and Georgina Amankwa, where it was evident that they were lying blatantly during a court process where, under oath they were expected to speak the truth during discovery. They were lying about the fact that NHIS data existed. So they initially said they didn't have the NHS data, and then when the court compelled them, it turned out they actually had the NHIS data because they could go to the Form 1As or the Form 1Cs and reproduce that data. It is the same EC that looked all of us in the eye, the entire country in the eye, and said that since 2011, it has not updated any of its biometric equipment. You saw that, right? You were in the press. You saw that information distributed to a wide range of stakeholders and citizens. It turns out that that was not only manifestly false, but it was blatantly designed to mislead the country into giving them tens of millions of dollars of our hard-earned money to procure equipment that we don't need. So we have an EC that by its conduct, historically, different political parties, except when they are in office and therefore they are somewhat insulated, have shown to have problems with candor. Now you mentioned that the situation has not changed, and what are we going to do? Let me make it very clear that Imani and organizations like Imani, the CSOs and the rest that are campaigning about this issue, operate in the realm of ideas. When it comes to pure power police, we have absolutely no standard. We don't have the means to force the US. In fact, sometimes we don't even have the resources. Some people have said that why don't we take to the court? They cost money. We often don't get donations from the public. We don't have the muscle to take the EC on when it comes to matters of authority and matters of power. What we have are the powers of ideas, the power to analyze, the power to use reason to compel the public to see things for what they are, and to say that the moral principles upon which this organization called Ghana, this corporate body called Ghana, was founded, will be defended by some of us as far as we have breath in our nostrils and as far as we have blood in our veins. That's all we have.
Let's take some issues one by one. After its exercise that it did, it says it used to test its equipment, the BVRs, which it has used in this system. It says that it is looking to register 100 people per kit over 21 days in all the 16 regions, and is going to have 13 million plus expected voters on the roll. You have suggested that we had run out of time, and also because of the protocols, the COVID-19 protocols that have to be followed before you get into a queue and go through a registration process, minimum, the EC needed 70 days.
So the EC information that I have seen suggests that they intend to take 40 days. I think you have seen information that says 21 days.
Yes.
It's this type of inconsistencies that I often complain about. But let's assume, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's 40 days. There is very well established literature on what we call queuing theory. If you have people in a restaurant and they are in a queue, how long do you need to structure your processes in order to make sure that you don't create bottlenecks? So if you think of companies like McDonald's, Burger King and the rest, they actually build these processes into their systems and their supply chain to make sure that when you go into a McDonald's or a Burger King shop, you don't spend, or restaurant, you don't spend any time more than a particular number of minutes. If we look at the EC and what they intend to do, we have enough data in terms of the process and how it's designed, the parallel streams, etc., that we can use queuing theory, to specifically model exactly what the process is going to be like. And the pilot vindicated us. Let me give you an example. If you apply Elan, right, and you model the EC's processes, the number of stations, you move from one, you go to the other, how many of them, the rest of it, it is not mathematically possible to use 40 days to reproduce the register. Now they consider when they say that they intend to register 30 million instead of the 70 million that is currently on the register.
Okay, I need to, for example, in that statement, I may have misconstrued it. They say that we are to register over 100 registered applicants per kit per day, as was attained by some regions during the pilot. In the pilot, they got in excess of 100, registrations in a day. It was only in the Western region that they had, I think, 70 plus for a day because there was a problem.
It's all fundamentally on sound modeling.
They say at that level of performance and with the continued enthusiastic participation of the Ghanaian public, the Commission is confident of registering some 13 million plus applicants within the first 21 days of the mass registration exercise.
Okay, so they intend then to register the 17 million.
Right.
We do our numbers, we do our modeling using Elang. And as I said, queuing theory is a very well-established domain. And it will be very difficult within that period without extensive mopping up, which often they've done. Even the 40 days in the past have not been the it, right? They've gone back and done mopping up several times. So in the 40 days, they will not be able to register more than 12 million people. Not possible. Why? Because even in normal times, they've had to do mopping up in order to get to that 60 million, etc. that we're looking at. Don't forget, they never got 60 million at one go. They did a registration that took them to about 40 million, 50 million, thereabout. And then they've done subsequent revisions, which have increased the number. And we all know they're not removing enough dead people from the register, which we'll come to. So some of that dynamic means that if you're doing an actual enrollment, and you're looking at something in the region of 16 million, it's not possible to do it within 40 days under normal circumstances. Secondly, the new procedures that they've implemented, we have now tested them at the pilot, and here are the results. We told them that when you use alcohol, and don't forget, it's a 60% alcohol solution minimum, sometimes up to 80%.
Yeah.
If you use alcohol on the scanners, most manufacturers say that voids your warranty. How did that turn out in Western region and the rest? Our scouts reports that unless the alcohol dries, you have difficulty with enrollment, which is exactly what the data predicts. So people think that's all
So let's get people to appreciate this. For every person who puts their finger on the machine,
yes,
after that, they need to
sanitize it. Yeah.
And by wiping it, you have said at the last time that by wiping it, what they are doing, they are reducing the sensitivity. Yep. And these scanners are supposed to be super sensitive.
Indeed.
And this can cause interruptions.
Because it's pressure potentials. And those potentials on your fingertip and the rest of it has an effect on the dielectric potential of the device, the scanning surface.
And beyond voiding the warranty, you are saying that once they wipe it, you need to wait for a while.
So what I'm saying is that one, they have not gone back to the manufacturers of these devices to revise the contracts in which the use to which they're going to put that machine involve the implementation of these radical measures, including putting alcohol on a sensitive screen continuously.
Okay.
Secondly, we know from the research, the literature, that when you do that, you reduce the sensitivity of the screen. That's theory, right? And I'm saying that during the piloting, we sent scouts who established that when the fluid is still on there, they have difficulties with enrollment. Now, what that means, therefore, is they have to wait for it to dry, which is what they started to do, and then they had recoveries. We also know for a fact that the devices that they are using have worse battery life in some instances than the ones before. When you look at the 12 March 2016 piloting, the results were better than this time around. We've had 4 years since then. The purported claims of improvement that the EC had used to justify the spending of tens of millions of dollars have not materialized. One, the failure rate was 3 regions out of 16, right? That is somewhat in the region of 18% failure rate for a pilot. Very dangerous. In 2016, the failure rate was less for the pilot in March 2016. Secondly, now that you've had this problem, where we know that there are defects in some of the battery components of the laptops and the rest of it, you're going to have to assure us that you're not going to have some of these
When you
problems.
said failure rates in 3 regions, are you referring to this pilot?
Yes. They had failure rates in Volta, some failure rates in Central, though not reported.
They say the exercise went on smoothly at all the designated centers.
It's not possible
except in the Western region, where the BVR kits developed a fault on the second day.
We also had a Volta region incident in one of the days.
Okay.
We also know that in Central region, though not reported, there were some problems in some stations, which caused delays.
That notwithstanding.
So failure rate analysis, one quick point. Failure rate analysis, where you go into polling stations and you look at how often do machines break out. It's actually very developed in Ghana. Codeo is almost a world expert in tracking this. They've been looking at data on failure rates and collecting post-registration information for many years. CDD is actually a world expert in this area as well. Imani does not do a lot of electoral work, but because of this matter, we've been looking at the data that these other organizations that are experts in that area have been publishing, and I assure you that the EC's claims are just not warranted.
Nonetheless, in this pilot, in the Bono region, they had 141. In the Savannah, 128. In Ahafo, 189. Central, 140. So if you check through, they are getting in excess of what they had targeted as a standard, 100 people per kit. And they have done all of this, and they are using this to project that within the first 21 days, when they start to do it, they could register, or they would register in excess of 13 million. So the 70 days minimum that you project is not what they need.
Well, so one, it's very weak statistical analysis, because what you've done is that you've done a sample. What was it, 100 or so sample points, data points, and then you have a population that we're talking about in excess of 30,000 polling stations. When you do your sampling, we look at your confidence interval, we look at your p-values, etc., in order to be able to make statistical conclusions. In that domain, they are not the experts, you know. So we have to be very careful in this country when we make things like, oh, what do you know about elections, etc. Because some of these things are highly multidisciplinary, and very few people are experts. In fact, nobody is an expert in every dimension of it. One fact is clear. During a limited registration, during a piloting, the pressures on you as the person leading that pilot is so much more limited. The variety of conditions that could arise is so much more limited that elementary probability theory should expect that you get almost no glitches. When you start to get nearly 18% glitches, you have to start running for the hills. That's literally the truth. Why? Because look, the amount of work that you've put on these devices is less than what you're going to do during the real registration. Two, the amount of pressure that you're going to be putting on electoral officers, which will lead to mistakes, is far less. Three, the degree to which the political parties are going to step up their vigilance to challenge every voter who comes in and they think they're not the right person, to do all manner of things will all slow things down. The degree to which, by sheer distribution analysis, pure probability, as you increase the number, you convert to a certain central tendency of failures. And so once we start to know what is that rough mean, what is that rough average, we can predict that you're going to have at least 15% failure rate in polling stations. Okay. When you're talking of 30,000, 30,000, you're talking of almost 5,000 flashpoints. If the EC had built consensus towards this process, if the EC had worked with civil society, with chiefs, etc., anybody who's tried to work with them to do more confidence building than the rest, it is very likely that any time there is a failure, tempers will be much lower. Okay. Now we're going to see political party agents fighting in these locations, etc. So what I'm saying is that the period that they've given, when in the best of times, 40 days is what you need. Now we're in the worst of times. You cannot use 40 days, period.
Let's look at this issue, and then I'll bring in Mr. Abuchi, because he will help us to also deal with the questions of law, more particularly the constitutional perspective about the fears of potential, disenfranchisement of some people, the NDC had made the argument that you had less than 2 million persons of the age of voting who have passports. And then you have less than 7 million who have the NIA cards. Their suspicion was that as many as 10 million people were likely to be disenfranchised if the 18 million is a target for the registration. So that they said that the coverage of the NIA in getting the near 7 million people did not favor strongholds of the NDC. Now we know the NIA that they are going to, from the 8th of this month, in 2 weeks' time, by the 16th of this month, they would have issued an extra number of the cards that were not issued. They have printed 10,900,000 plus. They are yet to print 90,000 plus. They have issued 7 million, and they have printed but not issued almost 4 million. They are hoping to finish all of this. What that brings us to is that we have nearly in excess of 11 million that they would have issued by the 16th of this month.
And they also say that they're going to recommence registration between 18th, right? On the 18th. So the assumption being that you will get more cards.
Yes.
So several issues come up, right? One of them is that you're not taking into account the adjudication processes, which could still be challenged. Some of those adjudication processes are incomplete. I'm quite surprised that the NIA makes no mention of that fact. A lot of the people that were withheld, a lot of the cards, that were withheld, were not withheld purely because they hadn't printed them, they had a backlog. Some of those cards were withheld because you had adjudication issues.
The adjudication will affect only 11,000 cards.
Well, in the previous situations, they had way more. So I don't know how they reduced it to 11,000, but that's fine. Let's even give them the benefit of the doubt and say the logistical distribution of these 3-point-something million will be able to occur in the next few days or whatever, so that you have 10 million people with the cards. Statistically, it's not as rigorous, because you know for a fact that you have people that have overlapping identities, in the sense that you have multiple, not overlapping identities, but overlapping identity cards. So there are people that, they have the passport, they have the national ID card, they have other ID cards as well. So the fact that you have 10 million doesn't mean that the people that before this exercise was conducted did not have any ID card, their numbers have gone down by the same margin. You get my point? Because some of the people that have gone for these cards will have other cards as well.
Your earlier point was that you have in excess of 60% of people of the voting age who have the ID card, the current voter's ID card, as their primary identification.
Yeah, because that's what they've used historically. Right. When you looked at the data, people that have ID card, who have used ID card as a primary means of identification during elections, about 60% of the total electorate.
Okay.
Now the argument they are making is, look at the number of people who now have the card. If you take it in total, it's about 55%, whatever, of the entire, or maybe even 60%, depending on how well you go. But let's be more rigorous and say about 55% of the total number of people now have the card. So doesn't that invalidate the 60%? And I'm saying no, because a lot of people that have the cards are holding overlapping cards. So it doesn't mean that the people that don't have any other means of identification, the majority of them now have the
argument is also that once the NIA is able to issue this many numbers of cards, you have a lot more people who can vouch for others, because the new law provides the opportunity for as many as, how many now is it about, for as many as one person to vouch for as many as, is it 10 people, right? So you have so many people who can vouch for others who don't have the passport and who don't have the NIA cards.
So 3 reasons. One is that the vouching process, the guarantee form, is a contingent right that they are giving to voters. There are ways in which that right could fall, whether because the form is refused, whether because you can't find someone who is willing to vouch for you, or somebody vouches for you claiming to be a registered voter, but you don't have any means of checking. And it turns out the person is not a registered voter. There are like 5 different failure points of that guarantee card. You get my point? Or that guarantee form. So for that reason, it's not a perfect substitute from having a definite right to register. You get me? Now, secondly, we now have a situation where the people, the judges that are currently sitting on this specific issue of whether or not this card can be retired, the people that are sitting on there are experts in this matter. There are 3 judges who have sat in every one of the Ramadan cases. Justice Bafo Bone, Justice Badagbe, and Justice Doche. Justice Tanini Ebo, I think, has sat on 2. So we talk of, at the very least, 4 experts on this matter. And we know the ruling in Abu Ramadan 1 was emphatic. It was that the NPP went to court asking the court to invalidate the previous or the existing voter ID card on the basis that that existing voter ID card will be redundant because that person will already be registered, so you couldn't use it again. The court refused. And the court was not only emphatic about refusing it, the court asserted that that particular card is the best prima facie evidence of someone's ability to vote. Now we know for a fact that last year, this organization called the EC registered 1 million and more people and then gave them the same card, right? Saying that at that time in the law that was in force, they are legitimate electors in this country. To now say through an act, a regulation that you intend to pass through Parliament, that those people somehow could not have registered and should not have registered because you intend to make it more credible, meaning that the previous forms of identification were not credible, it's not going to meet the constitutional bar. That is very, very clear from the record. What does all this mean? This means that the likelihood that the court will overturn this order is even higher than before, now that we know how they intend to go for it.
The court is asking them to provide legal justification, not factual justification.
Yes, but legal justification will
they are supposed to come and state the legal basis, and we'll ask Abochi to explain that for us, so that you mention the court.
But what is the best legal basis we have apart from the jurisprudence?
Okay.
What the judges have said in this matter is one of our best bodies of law.
What they said. They said, quote, the critical requirements which are clearly stated on the old voter registration card include the age and citizenship status of the applicant. It may indeed be legitimately argued that for all practical purposes, the old voter card is the best prima facie evidence of an applicant's eligibility under CI 72. Certainly, if the holder were not qualified for registration as a voter, how did he or she come by a voter registration card under CI 12? The law then enforced. And this is the quotation that he refers to by Chief Justice Georgina Wood in the Abu Ramadan and the Vance Nemako Kwesi Dansue Champong versus the Electoral Commission case.
But
let me bring in...
Actually, 1 minute. It goes beyond that. When you take the sum of the reasoning in that judgment, it's not merely that this card is important, but it's important also because in the law that was then in operation, they were legally acquired.
Right.
So these are rights legally acquired.
But you have heard the same Electoral Commission, even under Afarijan, talk about how our voters register was problematic because you had people who don't have to be there.
That's why I said that everybody
should. If you are going to do a new voters register and you want a credible one, why do you want to use what has been faulted as a part of the new product?
That is why I think everybody should take time and read the first Abu Ramadan judgment. It's actually the more profound of the three. It states that even though the court at that time accepted that the register was not credible or accurate, even though the court accepted that, it does not meet the constitutional bar of disenfranchisement.
Okay.
This is an extremely high bar to meet.
All right. Mr. Abochi, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. You're welcome back. This is News File. Certainly, definitely, your most authoritative news analysis platform. And once again, very privileged to have Bright Simmons, who has been with me in the studio for a while now. And Dean Abochi, Kofi Abochi, is on Zoom. So let's hear, Bright, you wanted to make some quick intervention when Abochi was making his presentation.
Oh no, that's past. I think he's dealt with it. But I feel that we're not saying, I mean, civil society has had a concern about the register as well. I mean, the issues around the credibility of specific forms of identification. During that period, there was no civil society attitude or posture that those things didn't matter.
Okay.
The issue has now has considerably evolved. Now, one, this is a EC that continuously violates the law when it can hide behind this issue of lack of consensus. You mentioned ROPAL as an example, where for many years they refused just to implement the law simply because they said they couldn't get consensus, and then later it was resources. The issues of continuous registration, which we've hinted at in this studio at least 3 times already, the EC continues to violate the law because it says it cannot get consensus, right? Now the problem is that when it suits it, it says that the lack of consensus is sufficient reason not to act within the law. When it does not suit it, it says, no, we don't need consensus. We have authority to do whatever we want. This is very interesting. We also know for a fact that this is the same EC that says if you lose your card, you can pay money and get a new card.
Right.
You don't have to go and re-register because you lost your card.
Yeah, that's done.
Right? Now for the same EC to say that, oh, yeah, you had the card. When you lose it, I'll charge you money and give you a new one. But now I'm going to do a new register. It's a different regime. You can't use the same card again. It makes no sense. This is obvious and patent.
But when you look at what they are seeking to do,
in CI 126,
do you see safety nets or measures to ensure that we don't come back to this argument again, where once they have the register, we don't come back to we must throw the cards away and do everything all over again?
You see, the Constitution doesn't really care about cards. This problem is uncannily similar to what we had in Ahuma Kanse. I don't know if you remember Ahuma Kanse.
Ahuma Kanse, yeah.
And in Ahuma Kanse about the prisoners' rights.
Yeah, prisoners.
When the issue around non-recognition of residency came, it is almost identical to recognition of certain types of identification. They said that they don't recognize the prison as a place of residence. And because they don't recognize the prison as a place of residence, you can't vote there.
Yeah.
You saw the way the court dealt with it. It is the same way they are saying that we don't recognize the voter ID and the national driver's license as forms of identification. To my mind, the issue turns on that.
It's in that case that the court said this voter right is a human right.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And it's a human right of very high caliber.
Yes.
Now, when you say that we don't recognize a particular form of identification as valid, but just a few months ago, you not only have registered people and issued them a bunch of it, but people that had lost it had, by virtue that they previously had it, been allowed to get a new one to allow them to vote. You get my point? So it appears as if the EC is not paying attention to the fact that once I accrue the right by having my name in the register, you cannot arbitrarily remove that name.
No, but the question I was asking you is not about the law. It's about what they are seeking to do now, which it does appear they will go ahead unless the court decides otherwise.
No, it's about the philosophy.
Is it a system that will not lead us to this another day like this, where we will say the register has problems, we need to clean it up, the register has problems, and so on and so forth?
But that question presupposes that the EC has given us a coherent reason why I want to do what they want to do. The EC has not. Remember that when the EC started this campaign, it said the reason they needed to redo everything else and let everybody register again is because the equipment they are using is faulty. And the reason why the equipment is faulty is because it's obsolete. And it's obsolete because since 2011 they haven't improved it. We have conclusively proven, using all the valid documentation that is necessary through evidence. Yeah? We've proven through evidence that that claim is incorrect.
Okay.
Now, given that they have not come back with any sound basis, in fact, the EC has not made the argument that the register as it exists now is bloated. That has been the position of one particular party. They made no reasons at all. They've been no reasons at all. All they have said is that
Jan has made that point.
But it's not the current head of the EC, right?
It's the institution.
It's the institution, but the institution has not necessarily, by its posture, ever said that as far as they had the Justice Crab Commission report. And that Justice Crab Commission report, Justice Benin was very emphatic in saying that it was advisory. The EC has not gone ahead to implement it.
And you remember that also happened after Dr. Bawumia and the MPP had done their analysis and told us about almost 70% bloating in some parts of the voter regime and so on.
In 2015, those of us in many of the civil society organizations, including Mani, had some sympathy for the MPP position, particularly because the EC was being so recalcitrant in not listening to them. We also felt that the argument that we needed to make sure that the register was valid because it's universal suffrage, one person, one vote.
Yeah.
Meaning that if you have a means in which you can vote multiple times and the rest of it, we invalidate that constitutional requirement. For that reason, we're very sympathetic. The position, the only person or the only institution that has changed their posturing is the EC. Everybody has been very consistent in making the claims that they have been making. It's the EC that all of a sudden says that it wants to change the register and refuses to give a reason.
Okay.
And when the reasons that it gives fails to stand to scrutiny, it simply retreats into this sense of I'm not accountable to anybody.
Okay, right. So we are almost at the end of this.
I had something to show. I don't know though if it is available.
Right. So
so I wanted to very quickly explain that. When you want to decide the way forward, which at some point I'm sure you're going to ask.
And those who don't have the benefit of the television, we are showing a slide, attitudes of key actors at the beginning of the public controversy.
This is to establish that, first, the position of most organizations have remained fairly stable. It's the EC that has flip-flopped and not given any basis. That's number one. Number two, if you could go to the second one, you now find that as we've evolved, and we now have a situation where we have an impasse. The NPP, as it currently, its position as it's currently known, is adamant that they want a new register, right? They know that if they allow the use of the old voter ID card, that wish cannot be held because it would simply reproduce the existing register. The NDC, as they currently stand, are completely opposed to the new register. We are proposed, given that distribution of opinions, that a potential compromise, if you can roll forward.
Yeah, potential compromise to do limited cleaning up. Yeah.
You can do a situation where you use the same validation requirements that were presented in the Abu Ramadan 1 case, where the court said that you couldn't use an alien process, but if you could use the existing exhibition and challenge process, that's fine. We could elaborately improve that process in order to remove some of the names that may be an issue.
Okay.
Right. We can also clearly, because the EC may say that we've already signed a contract and we've got equipment and the likes of it, we could still buy some equipment, but we can buy a far fewer number than the 8,000 and 82,000 they want to buy and throw away the existing 70,000 BVDs and 7,000 or so BVRs. We could say that, okay, Thales or whoever you are, Neurotechnology, all of these companies, we're not going to buy as many as we initially planned to buy. Can we stagger it over a period of time? Why is that reasonable? It's reasonable because we will increase the polling stations. So those new equipment could be used in the future. Thirdly, it is important to recognize that for a court to go against a jurisprudence of 30 years about proof of identification for rights that are well accrued is highly unlikely. Therefore, backing down on that point is actually strategic because it makes the EC look reasonable when in fact it shouldn't have at all assumed to have the powers to do this. And then lastly, we don't have the time. If you look at people that have understood our electoral process properly, they will tell you that from registration to the closure of addition of new names, which must happen 2 months to voting. So around October 7th, we must put a bar in terms of adding new names. You need 86 days in between. It means that if the registration processes go beyond July 10th, we are at huge risk of endangering the entire electoral time calendar. The argument that is being made is that they simply do not have what it takes to do a 40-day registration and an inevitable mopping up exercise, because even in those days when they didn't have these restrictions, they've had to do mopping up. They simply cannot fit that process into the timeline that remains. So they must do a limited registration because far fewer people and for a shorter period of time. Those are the grand positions that we believe enables us to reach a compromise that satisfies as many of the actors as possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, from start with, the NDC minority went to Parliament seeking to shoot down, the exclusion of the current voters' ID card from the new registration that will go on in the CI 91 that is being made. Unfortunately, irrespective of how brilliant the arguments of Mahama Yarga were, as admitted by some of the majority members, they lost by a majority vote. And so the CI will come into being, and the new voters, the current existing voters ID card will not be used. Now the court says it wants a justification, legal justification why it should be excluded. What exactly is the court expecting of the EC?
The court is asking the EC obviously to respond to the application that has been brought before it, of the legal circumstances that warrant the exclusion, the legal basis that explains or authorizes them to exclude it. You put this in legal context. Article 42 of the Constitution is the benchmark provision. Article 42 of the Constitution states that every citizen of Ghana who's above 18 years old and is of sound mind is entitled to be registered as a voter.
And to vote.
So that is and to vote. And so that is the primary premise of everything. And the court, in asking the EC to present the legal basis, I think, is obviously asking the EC to explain why, first of all, whether Article 42 has been complied with, and why and how, within the context of that provision, a rejection or exclusion of the voter's card, which is an issue, would not amount to a violation of the intendment of the provision of Article 42. If you read 42 together with Article 45, what the Constitution does is, first of all, to say that a person needs to establish three things in order to be a voter in Ghana. And when the person meets the three standard criteria, the person's name is entitled to be entered on the voters register, which is created under Article 45. So Article 45 deals with the voters register, which is created. But the voters register is created pursuant to Article 42. Now, Article 42, as I indicated, requires three things. The first one is that you must be a citizen. Now, I dare say that invariably that appears to be the difficulty often, establishing that one is a citizen. And I think we all know that we've not taken this issue of citizenship seriously over the years. And the coming of age of the Ghana card is a welcome development. There must be some standard document that differentiates who a Ghanaian is from who a Ghanaian is not. But in the meantime, any modality for establishing citizenship, once a person establishes that he's a citizen of Ghana, that person qualifies under the citizenship criterion established under Article 42. Once the person passes the test of citizenship under 42, the only two things the person has to establish, which in my opinion are less complicated, are whether the person is 18 years old and above, and finally, whether the person is of sound mind, even though I dare say the last one is equally as complicated in some circumstances. But fortunately, that hasn't presented much of a difficulty over the years. So the truth of the matter is that the court is asking the EC, it appears to me in the circumstances, to provide reasoned legal justification that explains the exclusion of the Ghana card in this circumstance. Now, let's unpack the discussion. It seems to me that there's confusion so much, which is ongoing, centers around three things. So we have to distinguish between what is legal from what is pragmatic, from what is feasible. What is legal allows you the legal authority to do what you have to do. And I'm not going to pronounce on this, strictly speaking, because there's a matter before the Supreme Court. But the question of what is legal is a question that answers the issue whether an action or a decision by a body is legally authorized. Whether the Electoral Commission has the right to compile voters' register is not in dispute under Article 45. Whether the Electoral Commission has the right to compile voters' register more than once in its lifetime, that is the issue before the court. Also, it seems to me. Therefore, and that explains why I'm not going to go into the context of that. But the compilation of the voters' register itself is not in dispute. The Electoral Commission has the right to compile a voters' register. Does the Electoral Commission have the right to compile a voters' register more than once in its lifetime? That is complicated. Now, if you look at Article 45, it speaks of a compilation of the voters register, and then it goes ahead to speak of the revision of the voters register. It seems to me that the contest before the Supreme Court doesn't focus on the revision at all. It seems that all parties agree that revisions can happen periodically from time to time. What I think is in dispute is the question of whether the EC, having compiled the voters register since its establishment, can compile a new voters register. And as I indicated, I will not prejudge the issue because this is a public discussion. I'm sure we'll come back to it sometime when the opportunity arises. But the next point is the question of pragmatism.
No, hold on. You spoke about revision, compilation and revision. In your reference to Article 45, the need to read 42 together with 45. How about 42 together with 45E, which appears to be the major contention, if you like, which says the EC can undertake programs for the expansion of the registration of voters. Expansion. That appears to bring up a question of whether the usage of expansion means it could do anything with the existing register other than expanding upon it.
Most respectfully, I do not think, and again, you are really tempting me to go into the discussion, something I'm doing my best to avoid. The Supreme Court is going to take a bite at this. The essential contest, which is before the court, centers around 45, which, and again, the E is also on the 45, but centers around the question of compilation. And then revision is a minor issue. Expansion, again, from a pure linguistic perspective, speaks of increases or increments. So when you speak of expanding something, you're speaking of the existence of that thing, first of all. And then you're speaking of the growth or increment, elongation, etc., whatever it is you want to, however it is you want to describe it. But that still doesn't touch the central question of whether it can compile a voters register. Compilation is composition.
So the legal justification required, can it include reasons that are factual about problems with the register? So if I can point to, and we have heard people suggest somewhere in K2 or somewhere, that there was some problem with the register and so it was bloated. So if I can suggest that these are ghost names, or they are whoever they are who are on the register wrongly, and therefore if I want to do a new register, you don't expect me to contaminate the new one with what is poisoned.
The basis for excusing an action when requested by the Supreme Court are normally of two kinds. We have factual basis and we have legal basis. When the court requests you to provide a legal basis for doing something, you are supposed to provide legal basis, not necessarily factual basis. Now, it's imperative, and I hasten to point this out, that because of the interpretive criterion that the Supreme Court usually applies, which is called the purposive approach, by which the courts interprets decisions, by which the court interprets the laws of Ghana, by looking at the fundamental purpose of doing things. The court sometimes goes beyond the pure legalistic facial interpretation of the laws and looks at the factual not just factual circumstances, but the purposes underlying or undergirding particular laws. So in providing the legal justification, invariably the EC, I'm sure, may provide things that are mixed legal and factual, or some of them which are even purely factual. Now, in so doing, of course, whoever is providing that, the intention behind that will be to ensure that it gives the court sufficient factual basis so that in its interpretation of the purpose, so the purpose here is the purpose behind the law, that is the legal, in its interpretation of the legal, it is aided by factual circumstances that informed the decision of adopting the particular provision in the Constitution in the first place. So the point I'm just trying to make is that ultimately, the court will be looking at whether or not a decision taken by the EC, a decision taken by whoever is involved, the body that's involved in circumstances, whether that decision doesn't violate Article 42.
Okay.
Article 42 is a very simple provision structured in a very simple way, but it's very loaded. Now, it's imperative to know that Article 42, as I mentioned the last time on this conversation, is perhaps the only human rights that is actually taken out of Chapter 5. Now, there's a purpose to that. The purpose is to stress the importance, the fundamental importance and the sanctity of the provision, i.e., in a manner not to make it violable.
Right.
So, in depriving anybody of the right to vote, we need to establish that that person himself may have contributed to the deprivation, but that the person was not deprived of the right merely because a particular logistical arrangement is not working or didn't work, or merely because we put in place a machinery that makes it difficult or impossible for the person to access the right. So if you look at 42, it speaks of a person qualifying, and then it says the person is entitled to register and to vote.
In fact, this same Supreme Court, Supreme Court has pronounced, just as you said, that even though you don't find the article in the human rights chapter, it is a human rights. So please proceed.
Correct. Thank you very much. So that's absolutely correct. So as I mentioned, that's the legal part. Then the pragmatic part. The pragmatic part is something that may also then feed into the factual basis that you were speaking about when they're speaking and they try doing mixed facts and law. So you can provide legal basis, but then you can present mixed legal and factual, even though the legal has to dominate. But then the pragmatism. And again, the difficulty, I think, as I can tell from all the conversation, the difficulty that appears to confront the ongoing exercise or may confront the ongoing exercise is the circumstances of the time. I think the circumstances of the time makes a lot of things quite difficult. I think when the EC started speaking of this project some time ago, I didn't have much of an issue. I mean, of course, apart from the legal issue, which remains unanswered in circumstances, but I didn't have much of an issue because the credibility of the voters register is important to all. Now, the forensic credibility of the voters register is even more important to all. And if you are introducing a biometric register, you are fundamentally reinforcing the forensic character of the register, which is a very important thing. When you introduce forensic aspects of these things, nobody can challenge them. So the biometric register is a fantastic idea. But if you look at that within the context of the circumstances of the time, again, this is something that would present a challenge or a difficulty to whoever is answering this question as to whether we have sufficient time, as to whether the circumstances of the time permits that the disease condition.
But the argument you would have heard, particularly from the NPP's perspective, includes that, as I mentioned earlier, we have known Afarijan to admit that this register is problematic. Now, even before the election challenge that was mounted, we know that, and Bright has so eloquently canvassed the position as held in the Abu Ramadan, Evans Nemako, and Kwesi Danso case against the EC, in which the court's argument was that, position was that, don't do a cleanup that affects everybody. Let's look for those that are infected and remove them from the register.
Because it's an individual right, not a collective right.
Yes, because it's an individual right and not a collective right. So the EC presented a number of persons that can be removed because they went through a process the court had declared as, invalid, using the NHIS card. The NPP is showing that the EC then lied to the court as regards the numbers of persons that needed to be removed. And therefore, the register remains tainted with some of those people still on that register. So what's the point here? Are they not able to canvass this point as a more important point than just a legal justification?
Well, as I indicated to you, sometimes it's very difficult to provide purely legal justification or legal basis for taking a decision. Matters that the court itself may have made pronouncements on constitutes what is called judicial, matters that have attracted judicial notice. So the court itself is aware of these issues because they were made pursuant to a particular matter that came before the court. Now, it's imperative for us to also understand that as the court is asking the EC to provide a basis for the rejection of a particular card, the court invariably is interested in dealing with the difficulties presented by that card in terms of authenticity, in terms of duplicity, in terms of whether the cards involved may have been sufficiently mixed with other cards that you can't even differentiate which one is which one actually has the proper authority of the state. So to the point that people presenting themselves to vote, we may not be able to validate the 3 criteria established under Article 42. Remember, I said these 3 criteria. The first one is the issue of citizenship. You must demonstrate citizenship. So a good legal basis by the EC, for example, will be to demonstrate that the card involved is of such sufficient tainted character that it undermines the principle of citizenship required under Article 42. So anyone presenting that card cannot be validated in terms of whether the person is a citizen and qualifies under the first leg for purposes of voting. The difficulty with this, of course, will be to show that there has been an audit conducted, and that audit has established some of the things that I mentioned. In the absence of this, you obviously will have a difficulty. But the key legal reasoning that the EC will have to show here is the legal authority. The legal authority to compile a register more than once in its lifetime. That is a key legal authority. If it has the legal authority to compile a register more than once in its lifetime, then the subsidiary legal authority will be the issue of the exercise of administrative discretion, i.e., you have the authority. How do you exercise the authority? You have the authority. Why have you chosen to exercise the authority in the circumstances of what we have at the moment? And whether there are alternative means that could have been explored, and these alternative means could have equally achieved the objective without having to exercise the discretion the way you are. But once you demonstrate that you have the authority, the only subsidiary difficulty or legal objection that could be raised by any other body or the court itself is the question of whether you have exercised the discretionary authority vested in you under Article 23 and 296 properly. And that's another challenge that could come in the course of the entire proceedings. So, as I indicated, the current situation we have is one that divides into these 3, i.e., do you have the legal authority? And if you have the legal authority, then the mixed fact and law, the question of pragmatism and the feasibility, whether or not in the circumstances of what we have, whether you have exercised your discretion in a manner that conforms to pragmatic considerations, and whether this is feasible, and ultimately in a manner that will not disenfranchise anyone under Article 42. Because Article 42 says once the person presents himself and the person qualifies under these 3 legs, the person must be accommodated in any registration mechanism.
Right. The other issue that some have raised is about the fact that our borders remain shut. Citizens are stranded abroad, and those who live abroad and would have wished to come register are unable to do so. Again, well, I prosecuted the ROPA case, and the court gave a time for the EC to implement the ROPA, register Ghanaians wherever they live, and to have them register wherever they are. The EC was unable to meet it, and therefore subsequently sought an extension of time. They were giving extension to do it now. It doesn't appear that they are able to implement ROPA 2 now. Question is, will there be constitutional matters? That's what people are asking about a person's right to vote being infringed, particularly when you look at it from the same court's pronouncement in the Tenade case. If you look at a pronouncement by the court such as, quote, a citizen's constitutional right to vote is so important that it can hardly be infringed and justified simply because a majority of the people, let alone some institution or organs, chose or agreed among themselves that it be. Neither the Electoral Commission itself nor in collaboration with Inter-Party Advisory Committee, IPAC, or any other authority can issue a directive which disenfranchises a citizen of this country. The Electoral Commission has no power to make any regulations which unnecessarily abridge the right to vote. Whatever it does in this direction should rather facilitate the exercise of the right to vote.
Correct. The court has repeatedly, and you have mentioned all the cases, including Tenadi, so there's no need to go back on them, but the court has in many cases repeated the imperative of ensuring that facilitations and facilitative options are put in place in a manner as not to disenfranchise anyone. People must be allowed, people must be facilitated towards the exercise of the authority and not not put in place mechanisms that actually are obstructive. And that's why the feasibility and pragmatism making comes into being. At the same time, if you're on the EC side, your argument, among others, will be that you have to facilitate the process for people to vote. But facilitation doesn't mean that you should allow people who are not qualified. The facilitation should be for people who are qualified, people who come under the 3 standard criteria established under Article 42. And in so doing, the EC says we'll put in place these mechanisms, including the proposed forensic mechanism, to ensure that the register is good for all time moving forward. But balancing the two is not exactly easy, and there are tensions. Of course, for political parties who are uncertain of the entire process, parties look at these things from different perspectives than lawyers would. Or let's say the political consideration is different from the legal consideration. For the political consideration, you are very worried about practical or implied gerrymandering tactics. Tactics and strategies that result in weakening of your voter base, so that you have exercises being more successful in areas which are stronger than, which are stronger against you, and therefore your strong base, as one of the parties was complaining, is actually being disenfranchised in a manner they are not happy with. So for the parties, the consideration is not necessarily the legal, but whether or not the political circumstances or variables are actually in their favor. And that's why it's imperative that the EC also deals or bolsters the issue of the integrity, not only the integrity of the proposed database, but the integrity of the current database. Now, the strategy of the Constitution in ensuring that the current database remain up to date and is of relevant data is the mechanism of revision, i.e. that the EC is allowed to revise the voters register from time to time. Revision involves removal, revision involves addition. Revision is a general cleanup. So if revision is properly done, you can actually use the mechanism of revision to achieve the tactic or strategy of compilation. The difficulty with this is that the EC wants not only just a revision, but it wants a forensic revision, if you like, a revision that is of a character that cannot be impeached, and that is of a character that cannot be interfered with in a negative manner moving forward. So these are the tensions, and that's what I'm saying. The central question will be whether the EC can go beyond revision to compilation, which you then raise the question whether the EC can compile the voters register more than once in its lifetime. And Article 45 is the relevant provision that deals with this, and it's interesting to hear the arguments. So
once we are still on the Constitution and these 2 articles, I'll ask my last question to you before we take a break and return to hear the 2 of you a lot more on this issue. In the 10-day matter, you remember that Justice Akwa made the very emphatic statement that we lawyers have used over time when he said that the explanation to Article 42 is that you just are 18 and or above and you are sane, you are sound mind. Once you have that, it says, they said the voting, that the right to vote is indispensable and that it cannot be denied in the absence of a constitutional provision. It cannot be denied in the absence of constitutional provision. Question is, in the COVID times, if somebody was receiving treatment, if somebody was in isolation, and you have come to their area to register within the period, and so on and so forth, having coronavirus is not the same as having an unsound mind. So you cannot use that to deny them the right to vote. Is that not so? Those who are being checked before they register, for example, if it is found out that your temperature is very high, are you going to be turned away? Is the EC able to do that once they are using all the COVID-19 protocols in the registration?
Well, again, very complicated questions, but the Constitution clearly recognizes the need to balance rights. And so the Constitution allows suspensory rights on the part of the executive for the exercise of certain rights in the interest of public health. Once these are done properly, according to the requisite legislative instruments or executive instruments, if you look, for example, the provisions under Article 31, the emergency powers, there are certain, powers that can be exercised by the president pursuant to pursuant to emergency situations in Ghana, and the current regime under which executive instruments have been issued, that is also allowed. So there are a few circumstances under which you can have certain rights suspended pursuant to public health, among others. So the fact that you have the right to vote will, of necessity, not imply a violation if that right is suspended for clear public health situations.
The court said it cannot be denied unless there is a constitutional provision permitting the denial. Constitutional provision, not an EI or an act.
No. My understanding of that is not. My understanding of that doesn't coincide with what you're saying. My understanding of that is unless there's a constitutional provision, and the constitutional provision is what I've just mentioned to you.
Okay.
If you look under Article 21, if you look under Article 31, there are what lawyers will call clawback clauses. These clawback clauses allow some clawing back of human rights under some circumstances. I'm being very careful on this because I'm not a big fan of clawback clauses. People should have the right and they should exercise the right. But under some limited circumstances and justifications, if it is established that a person has a public health situation which makes him a natural danger to third parties, and the person is under controlled environments or circumstances, and it's almost difficult or impossible to exercise the right in the context in which it is, that would have been discretionary authority exercised under that constitutional clawback clause through an executive instrument, which in my opinion would be legitimate. But, as I said, this is a difficult situation. I hope we don't really have to get there. But where it is justified and where very clear, justifiable basis can be provided for that. The fact that none of the rights in the Constitution is absolute. So when Justice Alka was saying that, what he was trying to say is that the right to vote under Article 42 is almost equivalent to the right to life under Article 13. The two are inviolable. You can't violate them. They are human rights that have to be exercised nearly at all times. But when he said that, obviously at the back of his mind, subject to reasonable limitations, justifiable limitations in peculiar times. And I think this is one of the peculiar times. But of course, you must have demonstrated.
Tenade was one single individual. And he got us to a standstill for the court to, vindicate his right. We had we had assembly elections that were held, that were botched really by one person, one individual. The fear by some is that you may proceed with a process, and that process, the results of that process may now become a subject of, litigation that may ruin the whole exercise.
It's imperative that we recap the electoral architecture of Ghana. And the electoral architecture of Ghana, as I have followed so far to this point, is one that tries to adopt an inclusive approach. The inclusive approach is designed to avoid or avert the truncation of the process through parties who may be aggrieved. The inclusive approach is designed to ensure that parties' concerns and grievances are taken into account and that they are dealt with along the line. I think any attempt to go the legalistic way can be problematic, and the legalistic way being that the EC saying, these are my legal authorities, I'm exercising them. And then third parties saying, we will exercise remedial options. And that remedial option could be going to court on the eve of the election and securing an injunction, and then putting the entire electoral process in jeopardy. So there are all kinds of legal mechanisms and mechanics that can undermine the prospect of the election for this year. And we should all do our possible best to avoid that. The only way to avoid that is to ensure a process of inclusivity, a process that takes people into account, the stakeholders. If you look at, the bodies that we have the peace bodies, that is the peace, led by the Peace Council. We have all kinds of CSOs, including CODEO. We have the political parties, the Interparty Advisory Committee, and all that. We have all these bodies that act and speak to each other together with the EC as a key player, as a central referee in all these. We have all these parties that talk together. I think any tendency to go the legalese way or the legalistic way is likely to result in a cataclysm, and that cataclysm can undermine everything that we have. Because anybody can go to court on the 6th of January and secure an injunction. And 6th of December and get an injunction. That can put everything in jeopardy, and then we're in trouble. And I hope that we don't have to get.
All right, we'll take a break here. We'll return and continue with this discussion because it's the only issue we have to continue to discuss. And Bright Simmons is still here. We'll be right back. We'll take the concluding comment from Dina Bochi. What would you like to say in the end? There are people who are saying that it does appear there should be some room still, like you have also suggested, for some consultation and things. The National House of Chiefs, for example, appears to have, giving an invitation, which we understand is being declined by the Electoral Commission, among others. The EC too must do its work. So it seems to be proceeding, that it is certain that it's doing what is right, and that's the job it's given to do.
I think that it's important to revisit the foundational principles surrounding the EC's mandate.
Yeah, we have just some 2 minutes. Just some 2 minutes.
Right, that's the thing. So the EC is a referee, and as a referee, I think there must be perceptual confidence in the EC's work. The whole issue of consultations and the whole issue of confidence building and bringing people on board is just to reinforce that perceptual confidence. So the EC maybe have power or authority in a lot of the things that it's doing, and there's no doubt about that. And I have a great deal of respect for the leadership of the EC. I think it's imperative that the EC harnesses the consultative process and brings on board all these actors so that there's confidence in the process. I think that the disputations do not help or aid in the perceived neutrality and the referee character of the EC, and that's the need. So I think that there's a need for further consultations. I would hope that they would open up some of these consultations because of everything that's ongoing in the circumstances of the time.
Okay, thank you very much. But before we close, I'd like to make this. Last week, Newsfile examined reasons for and against the Public University Bill 2020. We hosted mainly university professors and asked why they were unanimously opposed to it. And we made references to memoranda submitted by the UTAG, the CDD, and the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, who were all largely demanding its withdrawal for many reasons, including that it was retrogressive. One of our guests, Professor George K.T. Odro, former Vice Chancellor and current Dean, School of Educational Development and Outreach, University of Cape Coast, in his submissions made the following statements. I read. He said, among others, that currently the Institute of Educational Planning and Administration has been upgraded to a Category 2 status by UNESCO, and there is someone who has been actively involved in this. That person was to be granted a position at that place. The Vice Chancellor couldn't effect that because the Minister of Education is alleged to have made a pronouncement against the appointment of that person. The Education Minister, Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, isn't pleased by this. He says, while the statement is, quote, vague and speculative, it is untrue and unfair to him. Professor Odro was clear he was repeating an allegation, I should have required him to substantiate or recant it, however vague or speculative. The statement is accordingly retracted, and I apologize to NAPO. A while ago, I received separate statement from the UCC and Professor Odro himself. The university denies his allegation, and he also states that he does not consider the allegation as credible enough to use as evidence. He therefore regrets any inconvenience the presentation error, he calls it presentation error, might have caused the Vice Chancellor and the University of Cape Coast or any party. So I needed to say that. But how nice it would have been if the minister had made himself available for that important discussion last week with the stakeholders. I suppose on that note, we draw the curtains on this edition of News File, but I still have a couple of couple of minutes to spend, so let me read a couple of your messages. This one says from Kweku Enchibu. It says, I would interpret constitutional provision in the context of COVID-19 related disenfranchisement to include any law, including executive instruments that are not inconsistent with the Constitution. Therefore, if the EI is able to legally restrict other constitutional rights of a citizen by reason of public health, then the same restrictions could legally apply to the right to register to vote. That's my humble and learned view. All right, thank you for your view. A couple more of the messages that you have sent in, and then we'll take a break. Charles Rekubrobe. Charles Rekubrobe, you know him as Tarzan. He says that, well, okay, I have to close here, but he has issues with the manner he says is hiding things that are being done and not made public so that everybody can enjoy it, like Bright Simmons is talking about. My guests have been Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa, Mr. Kofi Abochi is Dean of the UPSA School of Law. Earlier, we had Dr. Bempa Tando of the Ghana Education Service. Have a good afternoon. My name is Samson Ladi Anyanini.